kind of on
We
the
are
same
ready,
page
yes.
here.
Okay.
Are you guys ready?
I am ready.
Two ready?
They can't hear me.
You guys are ready?
Ready?
Yeah, please
Mark,
come back to us,
camera.
okay? Camera, back to us.
May get loud here in just a second.
Okay, we're up. Toss. Is this on?
Yes, we're ready. Just
All right. You want to give
let's
an
go.
update first?
Yep.
Dr. Smith?
Ready? So I'm going to go ahead and give you all a quick update. University Hospital received 7 casualties from the blast area today. Currently 2 of those are in critical condition. The other 5 are in stable condition, currently being evaluated for their injuries. I want to thank our fire department who helped with decontamination of the individuals. And I want to thank our staff who did an outstanding job with decontamination and managing this. Obviously, an explosion like this in this area is always a difficult problem to manage. But luckily, we have been able to take care of all the patients that we received and continue operations here at University Hospital.
With a blast this large, this could have been a much different situation, no doubt.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest problem with blast injuries is it really is a little bit of everything. It can be burns, it can be blunt injuries, it can be penetrating injuries, trapped by debris, chemical explosions, and chemical exposures. So from that perspective, you know, it's great to have a team like this that can manage these patients.
Can you tell us the extent of some of those injuries?
So I can't tell you the extent of all the injuries. We're still in the process of evaluating everyone, but 2 of them are in critical condition currently from their injuries. So decontamination processes from our standpoint mean that we're constantly evaluating the patients, removing any chemical explosions and exposure from them, and making sure that we've got the opportunity to clean them before they come back and get treated. It can take anywhere from a few minutes to 15 minutes, and it depends on what the exposure. For something like this, we have an exposure of lots of different chemicals, so we make sure that we basically decontaminate them for everything. Yes, that's a decontamination process. So what we do is we actually take the patients, remove their clothing, remove all the chemicals from them, and then take them in the hospital for treatment and evaluation.
You mentioned there could be blast injuries, there could be burn injuries. Can you tell us, if you can, what types of injuries you saw today from this explosion?
Yep.
We're live.
We're live. So we saw a little bit of everything today from all the patients. There were a fair amount of burn injuries, a pretty significant amount of blast injuries as well, from the penetrating and blunt injuries from the force of the explosion, as well as some crush injuries where some debris had fallen on the patients.
So what's the recovery like from some of these injuries?
It all depends on the injuries themselves. I think the biggest thing that you run into in something like this is it's based off how severe the injuries they have, and you always worry about brain injuries just like we would for every other trauma, and then making sure that we can treat their orthopedic injuries or other sources of bleeding. Luckily right now we don't have any patients that I can identify that are bleeding significantly, so it's managing all of those blunt injuries that we have.
Dr. Smith, you mentioned Google Fire was here with that decontamination process. You saw LMPD. Can you talk about the team effort that goes into a situation like this?
Yeah, when you have something like this, it requires the assistance of LMPD, Metro Fire, Metro EMS, our hospital staff. We are on point with the city as well as their emergency response. You really can't treat patients like this without having all of those resources available. And we're lucky to be able to have that type of relationship with everybody here in the city. And you know, when as bad as this is, they got everyone to the hospital, and we've been able to decontaminate and take care of everybody.
I don't know if we heard you over the chopper just now, but exposure to the type of chemicals that your patients might have seen, what sorts of things do you worry about long-term from that type of exposure?
Yeah, luckily long-term exposure is not usually a problem in things like this. Where we do have a problem is in episodes like this, you don't know exactly everything that they've been exposed to. So we decontaminate them for basically anything and everything that is contained within any of the factories or processing, which is a little more extensive process, and that's why it's great to have Metro and have Metro Fire involved in that. But it's the only way to make sure that you've got everything taken care of.
Have you ever worked anything like this in the decontamination you're doing now?
So we have decontamination not infrequently. The most common reason to do decon is, for example, a car accident where you've got fuel or other fluids from the car that get into or onto the passengers. So it's not an infrequent process like that, but we've not had an explosion like this or had this type of decontamination in quite a while.
I may have missed this, but what happens to the body as time will progress to these folks?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is all related to what their injuries actually are from that perspective. And so you have to treat those injuries individually, and that gives them their best opportunities to do well if you do things like that.
Thank you, Doctor.
You got it.
I missed a little bit due to the helicopter.
Sure.
Can you just give me a little bit more on that decontamination procedure and just how unusual that is? Or maybe it is usual, I don't know.
Yeah, so the decontamination procedure is something we do infrequently, but we do train for it. And in particular, something like this is a little more extensive, obviously, than a car accident where you get gasoline or diesel fuel exposure, which is the most common reason to decontaminate somebody. With things like this, with industrial chemicals, while we train for it, we have to basically assume that they have been contaminated with everything in the factory or in the area where there's an explosion. And then after we decontaminate them, we bring them in for overall care from that perspective.
I mean, obviously you train for this, but you never hope for it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
In a situation like this, what are things that you just had to have in place so that way people are treated quickly?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is disaster preparedness and disaster management. We train our teams constantly here at U of L Hospital. We work in conjunction with the city, with EMS, and with Louisville Police for all of those things. And really from us, it's about standing up, whether that would be from the shooting at Old National Bank. We were talking about the tornado in Henryville a number of years ago where we were able to respond to that disaster. It's a different scale, obviously, for something like this, but it's always what we train for and what we do here at the hospital.
Jason, during that time at the Old National Bank shooting, you know, you're one of those voices that people were looking to. What do you want to say during this time to reassure people, like, yes, this big thing happened, but we are doing everything we can possibly do?
You know, what I will tell people is really something like this just demonstrates the teamwork here within this community. And I think that's shown over and over again between what EMS, what fire, and what police do, the way they respond to things, their ability to get patients to us that we need to take care of, and the way that we can work with them to make sure that we do things like decontamination at the scene and bringing them here. You don't have that everywhere, and we are lucky to have that here in Louisville.
You're saying that the medical treatment is able to actually start before they get to the hospital?
Absolutely, and it starts from the scene and what they're able to do. I don't think you can say enough about what they do and how they respond to folks.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you all very much.
Yep, of course.
You got it.
Dr. Smith, she might just ask you
Yep.
like 3 or 4 more questions just because
Sure.
they missed the beginning.
Sure.
Jason Smith,
Yeah.
Dr. MD.
Mhm.
Sir, can you talk to me a little bit about what unfolded today?
So the biggest thing today was the mass casualty of